Hello, today I'd like to talk about Ghost by Paul Auster. I will start with an overall idea, the broad idea about the short story. I will mention the genre, postmodern traits, title, and some themes. Later I will get more text-oriented by reading my favorite quote and explaining why. And at last I'd like to give my own opinion about the short story. So now I'd like to talk about the genre. And it's definitely not a traditional detective story. It combines elements from different genres, including the noir genre, which lead us to the next topic, postmodern traits, because this is called pastiche when you combine elements from different genres, and it's very common in postmodern literature. And there's a lot of other postmodern traits in Ghost, but I'd like to talk about metafiction and irony. So Paul Auster uses a lot of metafiction in Ghost, and metafiction is telling another story in the main story, which is basically fiction in fiction. We see, or we read that when Blue watches Out of the Past, uh, it's a movie, but he writes, quote, Robert Mitchum, an ex-private eye who's trying to build a new life for himself in a small town, etc. And here we read like another story, and it could give the sentences or the chapter other meaning or perspectives, and also it gives the reader the opportunity to like create a mental connection, a connection between the main story and the other story inside the main story. And now I'd like to talk about the irony in Ghost. And it's not because I have a specific quotation, it's more because the whole story is like a detective story, but not a traditional one, because normally or usually we would read about a detective searching for some mystery, but instead we as readers are now detectives, and we are searching for the detective's identity. And also he's wondering about his own identity, which makes the whole story very absurd. And these themes are very common in postmodern literature. And now I'd like to comment on the title and the characters' names. The title is Ghosts, and I think it's a very good title because after reading the short story, the reader gets an idea of Blue becoming a ghost because he's watching Black and he gets so obsessed with it, and he like becomes Black's doppelganger. He's the ghost that is following him. But also it is interesting that Paul Auster chose to call the main person Blue, and it's definitely a minimalistic trait because he's only calling him Blue and he doesn't describe his character as a normal short story would do. And that's because he calls him Blue, and then the reader can make a mental, like, he can reflect about it, and usually the reader will think about a person who's uncertain and doubtful when the character's name is Blue. And now I'd like to read a quote from the short story. First of all there is blue, later there is white, and then there is black. And before the beginning there is brown. And I really like this quote because it gives an idea of how minimalistic this story actually is. It's the introduction, and it's really catchy because the writer writes a few words, but these few words gives a lot of information that we can reflect about. And this makes the sentence very detailed without using a lot of words. It's very minimalistic, which makes this my favorite quote in the short story. And this leads us to the final chapter, and it's my own opinion. I really like the way that Paul Auster uses minimalism, And after hearing what other people in the class said about the story and thinking that it was very, very boring, I actually disagree because I like the way that the story is absurd. We are searching for someone who's searching for someone who's searching. It's so absurd, and I like that because it lets the reader reflect about topics that the reader wouldn't normally reflect about. And also the funny way that Paul Auster present the life crisis and the whole topic existentialism in the short story. That's the most interesting part of the short story, but I agree that it would have helped if we read the story maybe twice or 3 times to get a full understanding of the short story. Today's podcast was sponsored by Coca-Cola.